This is episode 294 of Jumblethink.
T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Jumblethink, where we interview dreamers, makers, innovators, and influencers all about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. On today's show, our guest is Guy Horrocks. More about Guy in a moment. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime fan, if you've never subscribed, right now is a great time to do it. Head on over to jumblethink.com where you'll find links to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and more. Now let's jump into today's show with Guy Horrocks. Hey there, welcome to Jumblethink. My name's Michael Woodward. I am your host, and we have a great conversation with Guy Horrocks on today's show. Before we dive into that, I wanted to let you know that today's show was recorded live at Propelify Innovation Festival, hosted by the New Jersey Tech Council in Hoboken, New Jersey. It was outdoors, overlooking Lower Manhattan. Beautiful setting, but it was a crazy cold day. It was pouring down rain and windy. It was like the first real day of fall and winter in the Northeast. We had some great conversations, though. We had an episode that we chatted with Jen Lederer a couple weeks ago. Great conversation about comedy and motivation. We also had Aaron Price on the show a couple weeks ago. He is the founder of Propelify and the head of the New Jersey Tech Council. So you want to check out those two episodes. And we have a couple more episodes coming out from Propelify. If you want to go to this event in the fall, if you're at all interested about innovation, idea formation, entrepreneurship, around big ideas, you got to go. You should check it out, and you can do that. The links will be in the episode note for Propelify, or you can simply search for Propelify Innovation Festival. Our conversation today, of course, comes from that event, and our guest is Guy Horrocks. Super fun conversation. He's one of the first developers, him and his team, on the world of iPhone apps. Before it was even possible to do it, they were figuring out ways to create apps for their customers and for themselves. Since then, he's gone on to start other companies and really innovate. We're going to be talking about a lot of really cool stuff, including technology, innovation, idea formation, making those dreams and ideas a reality. So why don't we go ahead and jump into today's conversation with Guy Horrocks. We are here with Guy Horrocks, and did I say that right? Guy Horrocks?
Yeah, you said it right.
Okay, cool. And he is the guy behind Solve.io, and much more than that. He's started several companies, and he's been on this tech journey for 13 years, 12 years now?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
How did you get into the world of technology?
Yeah, I actually had a very unorthodox start. So I always liked running events and selling things, creating things. I sort of was very passionate about painting when I was at high school in New Zealand. And
you are from New Zealand.
Yeah, I am from New Zealand. My accent's been a little bit butchered, but it's still there a little bit, I think.
Americans do a lot of things well. Tainting amazing accents is something that we should leave alone and just let the beautiful sound of the accents come through.
Yeah, well, it's weird because I think some people say, "Oh, you've got such an exotic accent." And I'm like, anyone I know from back home would be like, we don't have an exotic accent. Brazil is an exotic accent. New Zealand's not an exotic accent.
Yeah.
But from New Zealand, started in sort of painting, and I was very entrepreneurial growing up. And obviously, young kids, you always look up to people like Richard Branson, these people that are sort of seem like they're breaking the mold and doing kind of exciting things. Steve Jobs and those guys. And I think actually probably one of the first entrepreneurial things, I'm not a huge book reader, but I actually read a book, and I feel like this book had a big impact on me. It was called The New Thing by Michael Lewis.
Okay.
And it's about Jim Clark, who started Netscape, and Silicon Graphics started these $3 billion companies. And I think I'm not sort of one to read kind of boring books about business or I don't know, even the motivational books I don't always get into, but this was just really funny. It was about this guy who was quite loose. He'd go and learn how to fly a helicopter by taking a Air Force pilot out and then going, hey, can I push all the buttons? And so you started reading this thing, you're like, oh, this is really fun and crazy. And so I think that, and sort of seeing the Pirates of Silicon Valley, the Steve Jobs, Bill Gates stuff like really inspired me to sort of look into this path.
Yeah.
And if I'm like brutally honest, just like avoiding getting a job, which as a 17, 18-year-old when you sort of start university or college. But yeah, I was very fortunate at my college in New Zealand at University of Canterbury. They had an entrepreneurial competition.
Yeah.
And me and a couple of engineers basically created a forensic device to measure blood spatter at crime scenes.
Wow.
Which is so random. And we ended up winning this competition. So it kind of...
Where did that idea even come from? Because that's like you go, hey, you know what we should do today? We should create this thing that measures blood splatter. Hey, this sounds cool. It does sound cool, but it's not like... I mean, that's unless you're watching NCIS all day, I guess.
I do like the Making a Murderer series and these kind of things, but no, it was just random. I think these two mechanical engineering friends of mine that'd gone to a police training day.
Yeah.
And the police had talked about how, like, the first thing at a crime scene, they often measure all the blood data on the wall to map back where the person was killed or shot or whatever. And so... we saw that, and then we saw the video of people sellotaping string to the wall, and you're like, to start with, you're like, oh, measuring blood data, amazing, this is so scientific, and then you see them sellotaping string, and you're like, this isn't scientific, this is like so old school. So yeah, we built a little device that attaches to a camera, and you can basically measure all the blood droplets, and it feeds back a spider web to a point of origin. You can see within a couple of minutes where the person was killed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite random, but it all just came out of this random police training day at college.
Much more efficient, I'm sure, for them. And, I mean, I guess if you want to be Sherlock Holmes and be stuck in, like, the 1800s, then go for it. But science should be catching up to our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think nowadays, like, you probably do it on a smartphone. So, like, our technology was probably obsolete. But, yeah, it was a crazy start. It was sort of the most unorthodox and probably the most... it wasn't actually probably the best start for like a 23-year-old to start a company in blood spatter forensics. It's a slow-moving beast of a area, and everything has to be validated for courts. And it's not really when you've got a lot of energy and you're young and you're real passionate. Like you get into the bureaucracy of like crime and law and courts. It's like not probably the best place to start, to be honest. But yeah.
But it is what it is, and that's how that got you in the door.
It got me started, and I think, to be honest, like, it's probably a lesson for a lot of young people that it almost doesn't matter where you start.
Yeah.
It's kind of like just starting is probably the most important thing, because you learn so much about an industry.
Yeah.
You learn about customers and products, and like the first idea in its first baked form is like very half baked, and like I mean, you hear these stories like the Nokia's starting in forestry and then creating telecommunication company. It's like just starting is such an important step.
And I think that's one of the problems that we have with our educational system, in that we tell students, figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And most of them, I mean, like at 18, I didn't pick the career that I'm in now.
Yeah.
So like
probably didn't exist.
Yeah. And so for me, I think that we could do better by just saying, what should we be teaching? Well, critical thinking, problem solving, and how to adapt to changing technology, because that's what's happening in our world today.
Yeah, exactly. I think the technology is moving so fast. You look at like when I was at university, no one had smartphones, like they didn't exist.
Yeah.
Then, my second company, we built the first mobile apps for the iPhone, and like now I sort of think I had a whole career built out of something that while I was at university or college, like didn't even exist.
Well, and I want to talk about that, because you did create the first apps for iPhone. I've got to ask, did you have any idea that this is how the technology would evolve into what it is today, from that early concept of, smartphone as we knew it to how it incorporates into our everyday life today? I
don't think so. I think you realized at the early day in 2007, like, that it was revolutionary and things were changing, and it was amazing. I think the craziest thing was, like, I can't take all the credit. Like, I think most of the credit probably needs to go to my co-founder at the time, this guy Leighton Duncan, who was a very entrepreneurial guy, really smart engineer, and I started my second company, Polar Bear Farm, with him, which is the most random name for a company, but we had a lot of fun, and he was basically importing iPhones to New Zealand. And part of the reason we got into the whole mobile app development was because Apple locked the iPhone to
Right.
AT&T in
Right.
the US.
Yeah.
And so when you import it to a different country in 2007, it doesn't work as a phone.
Right.
And so you had to hack the software, the operating system, to adapt it, to jailbreak it,
Yeah.
to get it working as a phone.
Yeah.
And so, like, we were kind of forced into doing it, you know, because all these people around the world were seeing this amazing device, the iPhone that Steve Jobs had invented, and it didn't work in their country. So, like, that was sort of first point. And then the second point was, like, we started realizing there were the iPhone version 1 didn't have apps.
Right.
It had one screen.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you wanted to do anything else except the basic functionality, you had to build an app for it.
Yeah.
So,
And I think what's funny about that is that as innovative as Apple was, like, there was a couple blind spot things that you're like, that's obvious. Like, make it available to the world because that's a pretty big market.
yeah, I wonder sometimes, like, those things, it's like the digital rights for DVDs or music and
Yeah.
stuff. Like, I wonder if it was just a commercial thing or it was a supply and manufacturing thing. They could only, like, when we launched our company in 2007, within a few months, we had millions of customers
Wow.
using our apps.
Yeah.
And there were only like 10 million iPhones in the world, and we had like 5 or 6 million downloads. So we had sort of over half the market
Yeah.
using our apps. And I think, like, you sort of forget, like, that first year it was quite small compared to
Yeah.
it was big for the time.
Yeah.
But now it's like, you know, people can, you know, Kylie Jenner can sell like, you know, 5 million products in a day or something probably.
Well, and the question is, should she and should anyone buy it? That's a different question
yeah.
for another day. But
Yeah, exactly.
you have a crazy story about your first encounter at the, WDCC? Was it still that at the time?
There were two, yeah. There was Macworld,
Yeah.
started 2008, and then WWDC was the other big Apple conference. So that was sort of my first arrival in Silicon Valley in America.
And
Yeah.
you have kind of a crazy story because, like, people forget that you didn't have an app store when it first launched. That
Yeah.
wasn't baked in. Again, it's one of those things that you kind of wonder, what were the conversations going on behind the doors? Did they even know that that was going to be a marketable thing for them and become what it is? But you already had apps available prior to an app store. So
Yeah.
what is it, 2007 or 8? They announced it at
Macworld, yeah.
Macworld.
Yeah.
And you are there, and talk to us about that.
Yeah, right place, right time, I think. It was kind of crazy because you, like, a lot of these things in hindsight you can't plan.
Right.
You can't connect all the dots, I think is what, like, Steve Jobs said in that famous commencement speech.
Yeah.
But looking in hindsight, you're like, oh, yeah, this makes sense, and this led to that. And we just arrived there, and I think, you know, my co-founder, Layden, was like, look, let's take a chance and go to Macworld. We had very little money.
Yeah.
We'd made maybe 20 grand off the company, off like donations at that point, off like we had donationware.
Yeah.
It was sort of one step above vaporware. It was
Yeah.
like, you know, like it wasn't a proper business, but it was something.
Yeah.
And we just arrived there and we sort of took a chance, and it just turned out we were the only app developers at Macworld. So, when he announced that there was going to be an app store in 6 months' time, suddenly, like, the first person that came past our little booth was a CNN reporter from like Fortune and CNN Business. And so, like, it was one of those things that us taking a chance led to a lot of different paths. We got pulled into a startup company that sold to Disney, then built the first Twitter app. We ended up seeing Steve Jobs when we went to Apple. Like, the first guy came past our booth was like, hey, I know all about your company, Polar Bear Farm. And we're like 23-year-old kids from New Zealand building jailbroken, like, illegitimate, unsanctioned apps. And he's like, yeah, I work at Apple. I'm like, wow, that's so cool. That's amazing. I'm meeting someone at Apple and you know who we are.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, but the other thing is you're telling people to jailbreak their phones at our conference. Are you crazy? Like, what the hell are you doing? And so at that point, your heart sinks and you don't know what to say and you just go silent. And then he's like, but, you know, some of our team have downloaded your apps and they're playing with them. And then suddenly you get lifted up. And it's kind of like that roller coaster in the space of like a minute where you go from like the lowest of the low of thinking Apple's going to sue you and shut down your company to like, wow, there's people using our apps at Apple. This is the coolest day ever. It was a pretty crazy encounter, and we got to go down to Apple and, you know, sort of meet a few people there and then get quietly kind of pushed in the direction of when the App Store launches, you need to shut down this illegal kind of, well,
Yeah.
in their eyes, illegal, not actually illegal, illegitimate kind of app business.
Well, and the funny thing about it is, you're like, we wouldn't have to do the jailbreak thing if you made it so we wouldn't have to do the jailbreak thing.
Yeah. We were a couple of steps ahead, and I think the problem, the Apple creates amazing products.
Yeah.
But, I suppose the argument of Apple and Google is like Apple's a very closed ecosystem, and so sometimes the things that you want aren't out yet, like the wireless charger or the next version of whatever. Like, the first version of the AirPods, you can't actually code and create apps for them.
Yeah.
So, like, we were just jumping the gun a little bit.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If anything, I think it puts a fire under them to say, you know what, we've got to respond to this. Because there is legitimacy to this, even though they're working around the fact that this isn't the way that you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, the sort of weird thing about it is that, like, now I'm building software companies and building things that you hope to be a platform. And, like, it's kind of a developer or an entrepreneur's dream to have a platform where you're not creating all the features or all the apps, an app store.
Yeah.
It's a marketplace and everyone else is doing the work for you. And so when you create that ecosystem that people want to build on top of what you've created, like that's like the promised land. So like it's kind of funny. Like it shows that you got something special, that people are willing to kind of break the rules and jump the gun and create these things. So it's a pretty positive sign.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. Like sometimes they may view it as like you got to wait for the rules to come out before you're allowed to play. And so we just got in a little early.
I'm going to ask this question. It's not a fair question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I have friends that work at Apple pretty high up, and I also have friends that work in the startup world because that's the space we've played in Silicon Valley. Has Apple lost its edge for innovation, and are they just becoming an iterative company? What are your thoughts on where they're at and what's going on with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like there's different stages of Apple, and it's hard not to think about the passing of Steve Jobs, and like people put a magnifying glass of what have they done since then. And I think it's tough because the iPhone was so revolutionary. Expecting them to create another thing that's as successful as the iPhone is kind of hard or possibly unrealistic.
Yeah,
because it's become the platform. It's not another platform. It's like the replacement of the computer or the next evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, I love my earpods. I got a lot of crap when I started wearing them back in New Zealand.
The little tusks.
Yeah, or like in the dental floss container.
Yeah.
When I arrived in New Zealand, they weren't selling them in New Zealand yet.
Yeah.
And so you arrive up in a new country and you're wearing these white things, and people like, I think there's a few people that came by and were like, oh, what the hell? You've got like you think you're cool with your little random like things in your ear, and like and now it's like a ton of people wear them, and it's not like you're driving around in a Segway.
Yeah.
But I think like they're amazing product. I think they're one of those ones that's sort of understated and undervalued. Whereas like everyone thought the iWatch was like the next big thing.
Right.
In some ways, I don't use my iWatch anymore. I know people that do, and it's getting better and better. I use my AirPods every day, and I love them, and I swear by them. So they're still creating good products, but I think the appetite for what's new and the next thing is so, like, that thirst of the consumer is so, like, strong that it's hard for them to kind of keep up with it. And maybe like they've been a little bit less revolutionary outside of those things since Steve Jobs passed.
Yeah.
And I think like now it's like Google, Amazon, Facebook, there's all these companies that are doing pretty innovative stuff as well. So it's not like there's one company inventing all the trends.
Right.
So I don't know. It's a tough one to answer. They're still an amazing company, but like I think there's just a thirst for them to go faster and create bigger and more groundbreaking things.
Now, we're going to talk about Solve and what you're creating there in the second segment. To do that, people have to understand, what you're doing. Because I'm going to ask some questions in a moment. And if they don't have kind of a groundwork for what you're doing, then it doesn't really help them understand the following questions. So with Solve, what are you doing? What are you creating?
So we're creating a data platform at its heart, but it's quite different to what's out there today. Like we're trying to basically give companies the ability to take back control of their data and ownership of their data. And a lot of companies will say, oh, well, I own all my data or my customer data, and and I don't think they really stop to think about it, that like if all your data is sitting in Google, do you really own it? Like, because the way I look at it, like they're monetizing it.
Yeah.
They're creating a fortune off the data.
Yeah.
And you're just enabling them.
Right.
And you're enabling them because Google creates great products and
Yeah.
they're free and like, or cheap.
You're willing
and,
to make the buy-in because you like what they've made.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think like in some ways the Cambridge Analytica thing and the whole presidential thing, like the Russia stuff, like that was an amazing blessing in some ways, because I think had that massive milestone event not happened, I think the everyday consumer would not realize that basically your data is out there and it's being used and sold and on-sold
Yeah.
like hundreds of times
Yeah.
without your knowledge. And if someone does want to act in a bad way, they could.
Yes.
And so that was maybe the first proper big global example of someone acting in a bad way.
And a wake-up call in a way.
Yeah, it was. And I think if you watch Netflix's The Great Hack, like it's a
Yeah.
great documentary. And I think it's just, I think that combination of like the access and the sort of free movement of data, people's data without their knowledge or consent, combined with an intent to do something malicious, create fake news and stories with Cambridge Analytica where they're posting a million variations of ads saying that a certain person should be in jail and
Yeah.
this person is doing something illegal, and
Yeah.
and it's all fake.
Yeah.
But if you target it at people that aren't going to question what they read on Facebook or the news,
Yeah.
like it can have a big impact.
Yeah.
So I think it was a big watershed moment where it's sort of shone a spotlight on it.
Yeah. So how are you finding purpose in what you do there?
Yeah. So I suppose it's kind of it's twofold. You sort of have like you have a mission to try and help these companies do a better job.
Yeah.
And then there's a secondary thing where if you do a good job at what we're building, the sort of end customer's privacy should get respected more.
Right.
And so I think like at the moment, there's all these privacy laws coming out, GDPR in Europe,
Yep.
the California Privacy Protection Act. They're starting to basically stand up for people and say, look, like these companies need to be held accountable.
Right.
But in actual fact, if you run the letter by the law and look at like any company, Nike, SoulCycle, CNN, any of these companies, it's actually almost impossible for them to comply with the new privacy laws.
Yeah.
Because they're not collecting or managing the data in the right way to
Right.
start with.
And that's something that we deal with as web developers all the time. And I think we'll get into GDPR in the second segment.
That sexy topic, yeah, GDPR, yeah.
What's a big obstacle you're trying to overcome right now in the business side of what you're doing?
Yeah, so one of the really crazy things or innovative things we're trying to do is we're not building a traditional SaaS company.
Yeah.
We're building a hybrid of SaaS and open source. And so this is a really interesting mix, and there's a few examples of that have done well in the community, in the tech community today. But it does make it harder, your life harder, because as you build a product, you're not deploying it into one SaaS environment. You're deploying it on premise or at each individual company's cloud environment. So if you have
Right.
100 customers, you're deploying and managing your product 100 times.
Yeah.
So just from a technical point of view, it makes it a little bit more complex that you're not building something in one place. You're building it potentially in hundreds or thousands of places.
Yeah. And then for you, what is the big goal that you would say this is the success of Solve?
Well, I think like if I look at like a couple of companies, friends' companies, a friend of mine's company is Raka Chocolate based in Red Hook. Amazing, super ethical chocolate company doing delicious chocolate. It's at Whole Foods and stuff.
Yeah.
So Ryan, the guy who built that company, he works with a friend of mine, Dan, who's an amazing data analyst. And I look at his day-to-day job of trying to figure out what's going on in the business. And he logs into 7 different platforms. He pulls all the data out. He puts it in a spreadsheet. Then he has to match it all up because, like, the way that Google Analytics views a site view and the way that Facebook views a view, and, like, none of these things basically see eye to eye. And they spend a lot of their time basically dealing with data and getting it in a position to analyze. And so it's just a lot of wasted time. So we're just trying to make life easier for people. Their data's in a really good state. It's real time. It's in one place. And then if they're wanting to comply with privacy laws, we keep a really good audit trail of all those data points, who's looked at it, who's changed it, so that they're actually even in a position to do the right thing. At the moment,
Wow.
At the moment, you can go to the New York Times or CNN, Time Magazine. Time Magazine, you can put a browser plugin called Ghostery on your browser.
Yeah.
And Time has 68 tracking pixels on it.
It's crazy.
So 68 companies are tracking every single thing you read on Time Magazine, your location, your IP address. And then those 68 companies, they use MongoDB or Amazon Web Service or Google Analytics or Tableau, or they're pumping that data into 5 other platforms.
Yeah.
So one browsing session for a customer when you read a Time Magazine or Fox or CNN, doesn't really matter, they're all the same.
Right.
Is literally getting shared with like 300 companies.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Well, okay, again, we're going to take a break right here. We're going to talk about privacy, your data. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship in our second segment. We'll be right back. The heartbeat of Jumblethink is simple. We believe you're created for purpose, that the dreams and ideas inside of you matter. But often, it is hard to chase those ideas and dreams by yourself. That's why Jumblethink is here to help you. We encourage you through the podcast, but we also would love to connect with you on your favorite social media channel. Places like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Why don't you come and become part of what Jumblethink's doing so that we can help you, so the community can help you, and so that you can see your dreams and ideas become a reality. Beyond our social media, we'd love to become part of your story by helping you with Idea Camps. Idea Camps are a great event that will walk you through the process of going from idea into making that idea a reality. We'll give you a roadmap for making your dreams and ideas a reality. Where can you learn about how you can connect on social media or Idea Camps? Simply head on over to jumblethink.com and you'll find all the links there. Now let's jump back into our conversation with Guy Horrocks. We're back with Guy, and we are talking about startups. We're talking about the world of tech. We're talking about privacy and so much more. Before we dive into that conversation, people are going to want to know how they can connect with you. So,
Yeah, definitely.
How can they connect with you?
I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. I reply to most people, even strangers, on LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter.
Yeah.
I think like this day and age, if you've got something of value or you're trying to help people or you want to, reach out to anyone, like it's never been easier to connect with people. So
yeah,
I'm hopefully living proof. But yeah.
I love this conversation about privacy, specifically about legislation around privacy. As a web developer for several years, one thing comes back to mind for me is that we have people writing legislation that they don't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, even the EU wasn't compliant with their own laws throughout the various web structures for the government. And then they're like, oh, we don't have to comply. And it's like, no, you do. It's a very complicated piece of legislation that, in theory, is good because we want people to have choices in how their data is stored, used, and consumed by corporations. But on the flip side, we also have to look at it and say, from a development side, some of the choices that they're making are not educated decisions.
Yep.
So how do we navigate that world in a world as businesses and startups where so much of the burden comes onto us when there's ambiguity on what the actual enforcement is, what our responsibility is, and how we navigate those issues?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the core problems is designing technology systems today for what tomorrow might be completely different in terms of the legislative environment and what laws are enacted. And I think in some ways GDPR was a great wake-up call for people. It was my old company, Sailthru, like we had to do a big, as every software company did a massive GDPR privacy audit prior to it coming out into effect. And it was eye-opening, like just seeing where data is stored and which old systems still are getting copies and just which people on the team actually know how it's all designed. Yeah. Because over time, these teams change. There's a lot of turnover, and it's hard to keep track of the whole thing. So I think...
and even beyond that, the burden on a developer like me is to understand where third-party companies, like how is Google using that if we're integrating...
Good luck.
Analytics in there, if we're integrating all kinds of pixel tracking with Facebook and that kind of thing. And there is some law in there that says that we can't be the actual, I forget exactly how it's written, but basically you can't outsource your compliance.
Yeah.
So,
which I love, to be honest.
Yeah, I do too.
I think everyone, all these big companies are like, oh, it's fine. We've got these agreements, these MSAs with this company, and like the funniest thing is you travel to Europe, you go to London or something, and you load any website up, and you get the annoying pop-up, which pops up and says, like, the privacy explicit opt-in.
Yeah.
And if you say no to that and click on what trackers they're using, like, it's hilarious. You go to, like, Sports Illustrated or, like, Yahoo or something, and, like, some of them have, like, 100 trackers.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so Adobe, Facebook, Google, like, just Oracle.
Yeah.
Every single ad provider is tracking me.
Yeah.
And then it has their privacy policy. It has 100 privacy policies.
Well,
and they think, oh, we're covered because we've got 100 privacy policies. If something goes wrong, Sports Illustrated, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
Not the 100 other companies.
Right. And I think what's funny to me is that like Adobe, you mentioned there, if you're using Typekit, there is all kinds of tracking and stuff going on the use of that font and who's using it, where they're using it. And I don't think even people think about that kind of level where it's like, no, it's not just like a guy coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to track what this user does, their actions.
Yeah.
It's down to a very, very fine level of what's being tracked and who's tracking it. And then I don't know what Adobe's doing with that data just because they own Typekit. Okay, I assume that they're tracking who's using their font. But what else are they tracking? I don't know.
Yeah. It is interesting. I think the amount of apps that you download that are requesting location that have no purpose, like there's no mapping feature in the app. They're just using it to serve better ads or to get better data. So I think, it's a bit of a lottery at the moment. Like consumers can protect themselves if they use things like Ghostery. It's just a simple plugin. You go to the Chrome App Store and just plug it in, and it blocks malicious trackers. It'll block a lot of things, but it also will just show you everything it's been tracking, which is it's eye-opening. Like it is very eye-opening.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what Solve is doing when it comes to helping companies, because there are a lot of questions around how companies deal and structure their data.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them are scared to death about, like, am I doing this right? I think we are. How do you help?
Well, I think traditionally companies are sort of faced with this dilemma, which is like, we're building out a business. It's going to be collecting a lot of data. And what parts of our platform do we build internally custom? Because we have to.
Yeah.
And what parts do we buy third-party SaaS because it's easier, cheaper, better?
Yeah.
And I think most companies, when you get to a size, start building in-house.
Yeah.
And when you start going down that route, it's fine. But I think what we've seen is that there's a graveyard in every company of like legacy tech.
Yeah.
And it catches up to you, and people don't realize that building version 1 of like their data infrastructure, like that's one part of the challenge, but then you got to maintain it and upgrade it, and in 2 years' time, you've got just as much work. And so I think what we're trying to do is give people the option of the best of build and buy.
Yeah.
They can finally have a system that's in-house, can replace their single source of truth internally, but they also own the data, and the underlying source code is open source.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a hybrid of open source and SaaS, where people can basically have this data warehouse internally, and then it can plug into those third-party SaaS providers. And they may still choose to build on top of that and build things internally, but we're just trying to simplify that kind of core data warehouse piece so that people have a solution that can work off the shelf, saves them a lot of time, and then is compliant for all these privacy regulations that are coming down the pipeline.
Super, super cool for sure.
Yeah.
How are you making the money on the SaaS side? Because open source obviously means that you're not making money usually there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, but...
Yeah, so we use a lot of open source technology, and we open source a lot of what we do as well. There's some proprietary stuff there, but we are deploying internally on people's own infrastructure, and then we're managing that as well for them. So there's a SaaS license component of it.
Yeah.
But I suppose the beauty of the open source part is if people want to cut the cord at some point and not use our product, as opposed to a lot of SaaS providers where they're really stuck.
Yeah.
They're on multi-year contracts.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to cut the cord.
Yeah.
They could staff up, use the base of our platform, and build off it.
I love that philosophy because as a developer, there are so many times that we get called into hey, we're kind of end of life with this provider. What are our options?
Yeah.
And then it's like the race to, can we build out what they need before the transition out of what they have, and
Before the lights get switched off.
yeah, and then it's like that shuffle of like the client doesn't give you what you need in time, and now you're delayed, and now everyone's going back and saying, can we get an extension for 3 months? And
I've lived that world. Yep.
I don't want to live that world anymore.
Yep.
And I just find that interesting because it seems like a more ethical way to do business.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just giving people more control and power, whether it's over their own data, whether it's over the software they choose to use or build on. I think it's kind of the way of the future.
Yeah.
It is interesting. There's these walled gardens out there, like the Facebooks and Googles, and they're obviously amazing companies and built amazing products, but there are some interesting things happening, especially with data and privacy, and I actually think one of the most interesting things that's happened in the last month is the situation with Amazon and Allbirds.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you saw that, but Allbirds being the amazing New Zealand founded Tim Brown.
Crazy cool
sneaker.
shoes.
Yeah. It's a woolen sneaker. It's been the talk of town of the tech community.
Which I wish I was wearing right now with how
cold it is.
And damp.
Yeah. We're currently sitting in a tent.
Yes.
But yeah, so they had this amazing unicorn company in the space of 2 years, $1 billion company, and Amazon has just come out and basically launched a direct clone of an Allbirds sneaker at half the price.
Yeah.
But they've just shortcutted a lot of the ethical parts of what Allbirds represent.
Yeah.
So there's plastic in it. There's, they haven't done it sustainably. They don't really care about the environment. They're just trying to capitalize on the data they've seen around how successful Allbirds has been. So
I think that's a place in which, when we get back into the privacy place, should Google or Amazon or Apple, although Apple, I don't know if they do a good job at marketing this or if they're truly ethical in their data use. I'm not quite sure there. But any company like those that has that amount of data, they should be limited by what they can do with that data to start their own products.
Yeah.
Because that's completely, it's robbing. It's no better than what we're fighting when it comes to patent terrorism with China.
Yeah. I mean, they own the marketplace.
Yeah.
And then they see all the transactions and all the trends. And if a company does well, they can decide to clone that company and destroy that company. And I think the classic startup unicorns, the Caspers, the Away, Harry's, Warby Parker, I think there's going to be a lot of white label clones of those types of companies on Amazon's platform by their home brand. And some of them you haven't seen yet because they're trialing them in Australia or, But, it's a pretty unethical decision. And I think competition law and antitrust law will hopefully sort of solve some of it. But at the moment, it's kind of the Wild West.
Yeah. I have to cheer FedEx for terminating contracts with Amazon because of them doing the decisions they're making. I get it that Amazon's a business, but there comes a point in which you go, this isn't business, this is greed.
Yeah, I think they're just in this amazing juggernaut monopoly position.
Yeah.
All of those companies, in their respective areas, Google, Facebook, Amazon. And I think the don't do evil, don't be evil Google slogan, I think that's going to be put to the test a lot more because, they're really sort of starting to play a little bit with fire. And I think as soon as Facebook's had their watershed moment with Cambridge Analytica, they got burnt. They got a lot of microscope on them. Yeah. They're trying to respond to it, and they're doing some good things in some places, but there's still a walled garden where, they can destroy a company, they can cut off access, they can make or break an influencer, a startup brand. They have a lot of power and control, and it'll be interesting to see how they use it.
It would be also interesting to see how the government responds, because I know there's some antitrust legislation that's going through with tech right now, and I know Mark Zuckerberg is not excited about that from what I've read, even with some of the things that they're kind of trying to get people to sign on with petitions and stuff. And
well, I think Elizabeth Warren's been probably the most outspoken.
Yeah.
You know, she said that she wants to break up those large tech companies.
Yeah.
You know, obviously being in New York, we've seen the first-hand battlefield around Amazon and their Queens office they were trying to build.
Yep.
And there's obviously two sides to the argument. One is like it's going to create jobs and build the economy there. The other one is it's going to destroy jobs and businesses and small business. So like,
Yeah.
it's kind of tough. Like I'm not the person to kind of make the ultimate judgments on these things because I don't know all the facts. But yeah, I think you know, are we going to live in a place where there's one winner?
Yeah.
And Amazon's the one marketplace for every product. You know,
Yeah.
like. Hopefully not. Customers want choice and they like to support the small vendor down the street. But it turns out, like, if I can get that large fridge delivered in 30 minutes and can buy it one tap on my iPhone, I might not go down the street to Billy's Fridge Company or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting time, I think.
Be interesting to see how it unfolds. I want to make sure that we talk about one other topic before we wrap up today's episode. And that is about entrepreneurship as a whole. You've started 4 businesses.
Yes.
And you've exited some.
Yeah.
And you're running some.
Yep.
And you are, I'm sure, thinking about new ideas that are on the horizon for yourself. I don't see you just stopping at 4.
No, there's a lot of things you want to do, and
Yeah.
you sort of get one chance at some of these things.
Yeah.
So, but it's a tough one because I think if you do too many things at once, you don't do anything well. So you sort of need the ability to focus for an extended period of time on one problem and try and solve it well with a startup. But yeah, you always sort of have that itch at the back of your head of like, I would love to start a company doing, you know, athletic wear or, you know, travel or whatever. You know, like
Yeah.
you always look at these things. So yeah, it's tough. I think there's never been an easier time to start a company. And in some ways, there's never been a harder time for that company to succeed because the barriers of entry are so low.
Yeah.
Competition's high. But, like, I could start a clothing company today, and you can use there's companies like The Loyalist, Tea Republic,
Yep.
who you can outsource all the design and production and fulfillment. So I could literally start on this podcast a clothing company doing cool design hoodies and T-shirts and whatever, and never have to handle any of the hard parts of that company.
Yeah.
And it could be live by the end of this podcast.
Yeah.
So it is amazing.
Yeah.
But now there's a lot of competition. How are people going to actually drive eyeballs and awareness to that?
Well, and I have a friend who he runs a business in carpet cleaning, strangely enough.
Sexy.
Yeah, and he's done quite well in the market that he's in, but he always says, I'm not a carpet cleaning company, I'm a marketing company that happens to market a carpet cleaning service.
So true, yeah.
And I think that's more and more of what business is becoming is, you got to deliver on the products, the services, the messages you're sharing, but on the flip side, it's really a marketing game. And if you can get the marketing piece and then deliver on the product that you're doing, then you're golden.
100%.
But if you're missing the marketing piece, you're just going to die.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you tree falls in a forest. Did the carpet cleaning company even exist if no one knows about it? You know?
Yeah. So how do you do some meetups for entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that journey of working with other entrepreneurs and helping them understand the roadmap through the future of entrepreneurship for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think once you go through it a couple of times and deal with investors and have friends that have other cool startups, you start realizing that, you know, there's not always one right path. And you start being very grateful for the people that have helped you along the way. And so when I arrived in New York, I knew one person who at that time was releasing a book called 3DD, which is a book of 3D boobs.
Okay.
So not hugely helpful for my software startup, as you can imagine, but that was my one person. He's an awesome guy. He's actually gone on to be an amazing photographer and basically done a lot of the early photography for Allbirds and Away and all these kind of like tech unicorn companies. But I got an introduction to a guy at Google, Craig Neville Manning, who started the Google office in New York, who's also a Kiwi. Amazing guy. He introduced
You
me
guys
to...
taking over the world? I mean, first
No,
Lord of the
no.
Rings, and then now...
It's amazing how it's such a small country. There's only like 4 million people, and we've found places in different homes around the world. So it's cool when you come to a city like New York and you find Kiwis, and there's Sean Marks running the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah.
Sarah Rob O'Hagan, who was running Equinox and Gatorade at the moment. There's some pretty cool Kiwis in the city.
Yeah.
But yeah, he made an intro to Mark Darcy, who's now the chief creative officer at Facebook, but he was at Time Warner. Mark introduced me to a bunch of people at Time Warner, and we were lucky enough to sign CNN as one of our first clients in 2012.
Wow.
So it was kind of one of those spider webs where you never know where that first door opening or intro is going to take you, and sometimes it's 4 intros or 4 doors deep, and then you get an opportunity, and you still have to be good enough to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
But when I saw that and I was the beneficiary of the goodwill, I just wanted to return the favor. And so since 2012, when I got my visa here, I've run a monthly entrepreneur meetup. I started just doing Kiwi entrepreneurs, which is very niche.
Yeah.
But we did it at the only New Zealand coffee shop in New York, which
Yeah.
is Happy Bones
Okay.
in Soho. Craig from Google at the time, he's now at Sidewalk Labs. He turned up to my first meetup, and then he invested in the coffee shop because he's obsessed with coffee. And so I kind of feel like it was like one of those Bruce Wayne moments where you turn up to the hotel and then buy the hotel. But it was really cool, and he's been super generous with us along the way. And so I've had 75 of these meetups, and we have about 15, 20 people come, and we have one person speak about their startup, and everyone sort of pitches in of how they can help that person.
Wow.
And it's very low-key. I think sometimes when you organize events and run things, there's a lot of weight of expectation. It's almost like content or podcasts, as you would know.
Yeah.
There's always that people are afraid to start because they think, I don't want to start if it's going to be lame.
Yeah.
I don't want to start if it's not going to be really good.
Yeah.
And so they almost like out-psych themselves from starting.
Yeah.
And instead of just starting and doing something casual and low-key, and this is really casual. We just have a coffee, a flat white, and we chat about startups, and it takes about 4 hours of my time a month, and that's it.
That's awesome.
So it's very low-key, but it's fun. I met a lot of great people.
As we wrap up this segment, can you give us maybe 3 tips that you would tell an entrepreneur that's in their early stages of saying, I think this is the journey for me? What would you tell them that they need to know about navigating this journey?
I think starting is really important. Like, you can do so much planning and write business plans and all this stuff, and like, you learn so much from just starting.
Yeah.
And you don't have to invest in the bit. Like, if I want to start a podcast, I don't have to buy all this fancy podcast equipment.
Yeah.
I might start on my iPhone and just
use
video.
Anchor. Yeah.
Yeah, use Anchor. It's great. Like, so I think everyone sort of thinks about doing it the best instead of just starting.
Yeah.
So I think starting is the very first most important thing. I think the second thing is, like, you don't have to have the business model all figured out day one.
Yeah.
It's a long game.
Yeah.
If you're 23 or if you're 33 or 43 or whatever, like, and you're starting your first company, you can start and just try things and help people. Like, if you're helping people, the product doesn't have to solve the whole solution day one.
Right.
You can massage the rough edges with consulting and, like, and it doesn't even, like, adding value to people. I think, like, just giving value to people without expectation of getting something in return is such an amazing philosophy.
Yeah.
And I was lucky. I learned a lot from Gary Vaynerchuk, who was basically our first investor years ago, 6-7 years ago. And he's obviously now a big celebrity now, and he does very well on his podcast telling these things. But there's a lot of truth to it. If you give value to people, I've helped friends and clients find their new job.
Yeah.
Like, that's not part of our company. That's not part of my next company. It's just, I like to help people, and by doing the right thing, like, good karma comes back, and you don't have to expect something in return and say, hey, I gave this person 2 favors and I didn't get a favor back. But if I give 100 favors, I'm sure something good will come of it.
Yeah.
And if I'm giving them to good people who, like, are grateful for it as well, like, I just think it's a really good way to go about things. Adding value to other people and giving your time without the expectation of something in return is probably that second tip. And then I think I would say the third tip is, like, don't be afraid to launch.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, everyone perfects things, And
Death by perfection.
Yeah, it's like it's ship and iterate.
Yeah.
Like I think that sort of worry about like I suppose like of how people are going to judge you is probably a big thing. And I think just getting things out there and iterating, and your first version, like there's that age-old thing of like if you're not embarrassed by version 1, you didn't ship fast enough.
Yeah.
I think there's something to that. And saying that, I could be hypocritical. We've been head down building a product that we're trying to perfect, and we haven't launched yet. So but you know, there's a lot to it. Like you just launch and iterate. I think there's a lot to that.
Well, and I think even when you do wait for perfection and you look back for what your launch was, thinking we've arrived at day 1, you look back and you go, "Wow, we were naive."
Yeah.
I know.
You just started. You know, it's not even. You weren't even at the first big milestone. Maybe,
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
By the time you've launched version 1.
Yep. Well, we're going to take a break right here, and we're going to be back for rapid fire questions.
Awesome.
Are you ready to chase those big ideas and dreams, but you're not quite sure where to start? Why not try the Dreamer's Guide to Micro Experiments? It's something we've been working on for a while, and it's a little guide that will walk you through how you can use micro experiments to see if your idea and dream is something you want to chase. Best of all, it's completely free. All you have to do is head on over to jumblethink.com. You'll see a little pop-up right there that says download the free Dreamer's Guide to Micro Experiments. Click that button and get your free guide. Now let's jump into rapid fire questions with Guy Horrocks.
Placez votre électrophone à portée de votre main. Levez seulement le bras pour mettre l'aiguille sur le...
We are back with Guy, and we're doing rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I am ready. Never been more ready.
First question. What is one lie about entrepreneurship you'd like to break?
That we're all successful and happy all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely a lie.
It's a tough battle, and I think even those ones that you see in the press, or just because you got a TechCrunch article doesn't mean like you're like killing it.
They're all lies. They take the highlight reel and then they bloat that.
Yeah.
So
it's a constant struggle, but that's why you got to love what you're doing. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, like there's a lot of highs and lows, and it mellows you out a bit.
If you weren't doing what you're doing, what do you think you'd be doing?
So many things I'd like to do. I actually would love to. I'm a bit of a sneaker freaker a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with knitwear and sneakers, and I've got friends in that industry.
Yeah.
I'd probably be designing sneakers.
That's
or
cool.
painting or something.
What is one thing that has been a key to your success?
To be honest, I've got a friend of mine, Claudia Batten, who's a Kiwi entrepreneur who started Massive, which sold to Microsoft. It was like the first advertising in video games. Amazing entrepreneur. And she has this philosophy called the squiggly line, which is like the path to success is not straight.
Yeah.
And she said something that I love that really resonates with me, which is like, sometimes like you get to a point where you're like, this is insanity. Why is this startup so hard?
Yeah.
Why can't we get a customer? Why is no one paying us revenue? Why does everyone else look successful? Whatever. And you get to that point where you're just at your lowest and you think, this is so hard. Should I quit?
Yeah.
And you keep going. And I think just the tenacity to keep going, and her reasoning with her own brain is like, this is insanity. No one in their right mind would keep going at this point because you're in the tar pit.
Yeah.
You're in the deepest, darkest hole and everything's sludge.
Yeah.
And you keep going, and the tenacity to keep going, her only like gratifying part of that is like, she's like, well, I think I might succeed because no one else would be stupid enough to keep going at this point. So I think just like
that stubbornness.
Yeah, that stubbornness and tenacity to keep going. Like it's tough as well because like you have to balance that with the knowing when to throw in the towel.
Yeah.
And when it's not smart.
Yeah.
But I think just keep going. Like the amount of people that give up along the way or don't even start. Like just if you're willing to put in that effort, takes you a long way.
How do you define success for you?
I think over time it's changed. When you're in your early 20s, you're like, I'm going to be rich and have fast cars and all this stuff. And then you realize none of that stuff's really important.
Yeah.
And I think happiness of yourself and your friends and family are like kind of all that matters. So getting yourself and your family and my partner and my wife like into a point where we're just happy and content and have some kind of balance in your life, I think is success.
Yeah. Our final rapid fire question is, what is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
Oh, I think I'd love to start like in design my own sneakers. Like
Yeah.
I think I love knitwear and Flyknit, and so it's something I've been toying with. I learned how to make Air Jordans a year and a half ago. Yeah, I'd like to just for my own satisfaction. It's not like I don't need to be Adidas or Nike or Allbirds.
Yeah.
I just would like to launch something that people could buy and use and they
Yeah.
think are cool. It's so random because there's so many more amazing things you can do with your time. And like, like obviously anything you do these days, you should be thinking like, I think of climate change, environment, ethical, like all companies hopefully will become that. But yeah, I like sneakers.
As we wrap up, what's your final thought for all of us listening today?
I think like it's never been easier to start a company, but then it's harder to succeed.
Yeah.
But I think people should just start things if they're passionate about them, give them a go. And I think the only sort of obligation on people now is really to start something that hopefully improves people's lives.
Yeah.
There's a gazillion ad tech companies out there that are serving more ads.
Yeah.
So hopefully people can start something that's not just serving me another ad.
Yes.
I mean, that'd be something.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Guy, thank you so much for taking time out, and great to meet with
Pleasure.
you here at Propelify. Wish it was sunny and not rainy and windy, but it is, and I still love the weather. It's good to be fall. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the time.
Once again, we want to thank Guy for being on today's show. You can find his links in the episode notes. We also want to thank Propelify Innovation Festival, New Jersey Tech Council, and Podcast Row for helping to facilitate and host this event. You should go check them out. It's a super cool event, and I think you're going to love it. If you love ideas and innovation, you need to be there in 2020. Here's the deal. Chasing big ideas and dreams only happens when you step out. Sometimes it is a known road. It's a road that you can see others who have done it. But in the case of Guy, he gives a great example of how often there's an uncharted road, a road that you can use innovation and new ideas to form a space that didn't exist. You can even beat the big corporations like Apple to the punch by being able to see the unknown potential, the unseen potential that others are missing. So maybe your big idea and dream is one that is a little bit more typical of an entrepreneur, but maybe it's something crazy and wild and completely innovative in a new and fresh way. Whatever it is, it's going to take people like you who have big ideas and dreams, who are willing to step into the unknown, who are willing to risk it all and see those dreams and ideas become a reality. Now, here's the deal. It's your turn. You got to go chase those dreams. You got to chase those ideas, because when you do, it can change the world. So get out there, dream big, and change the world around you.
Vous êtes une autre personne. Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant. Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.